All right, so now we're officially getting started. Okie doke. So thank you everyone for coming. We realize that a Sunday might not be, the most ideal day, but we're really happy to have you guys here. Our panelists are all, super excited. And, we're really happy that everyone wants to learn more about research. So to kind of go into kind of the structure of what we're going to talk about today, we're going to start off with introducing our organization. So we're co-hosting this with Women in STEM Athena. So we will start with that. And then after that, we're going to go into the benefits of research. So for some of you, you might be, pre-med or pre-health or wanting to go to graduate school. So for those people, research is becoming more and more of kind of a requirement for some of those programs. But for people that are not interested in those things, research can still be really important and can help you, broaden your horizons as well. Then we're going to touch on a couple of places to find research, how to go about like applying for those positions and stuff like that. And then we are going to get into the Q&A. So obviously you guys probably can see that we already have a couple of questions in the Q&A right now. So great job. If you guys have questions throughout the presentation, please drop them in the Q&A and not the chat because I cannot see the chat when I'm screen sharing. Okay, so to just start off, General Intelligences is co-hosting this. Just to give you guys a very quick brief overview, we're a nonprofit and our focus is on helping predominantly first generation and low income students and connecting them to resources and also addressing the issue of a hidden curriculum. So that can involve things that relate to, pre-professional stuff, whether it's just like things like knowing how to go to office hours or talking to professors and stuff like that. So basically we have, we pride ourselves on being, student led and all of the stuff that we offer is from a peer perspective. So all of our team has either recently been in school or, is currently in school. So we have that perspective on the situation. So we have, people from our team that are all over the US, Canada, a couple other countries as well. And we provide free tutoring. So check out our website if that's interesting to you. All right, if you guys want to introduce yourselves.
Yeah, of course. So we're Athena, which is a sub-program to the organization Women in STEM. We are also a nonprofit, and we mostly focus on bridging the gap between minority girls and girls from underprivileged communities and the STEM career of their choice. So Women in STEM focuses on bridging that same gap, but to girls in general. It's a very large organization. It's international and has over like 1,000 to 2,000 members. So we just wanted to make sure that there was a space that was more specifically targeted to girls that might not know that these resources are available to them, might not know how to use them. Just create a smaller space that would just kind of really help tailor the experience to girls that have maybe slightly different opportunities that other girls that may be from more privileged backgrounds. Like General Intelligence, we're also completely student run. And like I said, we are a sub-program to Women in STEM, but we do run independently in the sense that our projects are individual from the organization of Women in STEM.
All right, so now we're gonna have the panelists introduce themselves. So obviously I'm also a panelist, so I guess I can start off and then we'll just kind of go down through the screen. So before we start on the actual introductions, I just want to put some quick disclaimers out there. The questions that you guys can ask us are about anything relating to research. Please just try to keep all those questions on topic to research. I know a lot of you might be tempted to kind of divert it to different things, but just try to keep it central to research and the stuff that we have done regarding to that. Also, please do keep in mind that, like I said earlier at the start of the presentation, we have people from high school through people that have graduated college here. So there's a vast difference in the kind of material that people have covered and the kind of stuff that they know in regards to research. So don't ever feel like your question is, something that's not important to ask or that it's too simple of a question. Feel free to ask any of those questions. So to kick off the introductions, I'm Magda. I am a rising junior at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, so really big research school. I do clinical research in a outpatient clinic associated with U of M Medicine, and I also do biochemistry research at U of M's medical school. Pratusha, if you could go next.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Pratusha. I'm also a member of General Intelligences, and I also have some research experience. Right now, I'm a master's student at the University of North Texas Health Science Center. I'm doing a master's in medical science through a special master's program, and my research started in undergrad. I went to undergrad at the University of Texas at Dallas, and I was in a lab there. It was a brain imaging, neuro and aging cognition lab. So that was really interesting. And then I also did research through a pediatric cardiology lab through UT Southwestern Medical Center, which is located in Dallas. But I'm excited to meet everyone and hopefully give you guys some help.
Yeah, so if anyone else wants to go next, go ahead.
I can go. Hi, my name is Annika. I recently graduated high school and I will be attending Haverford College in the coming fall. I've done research in a laboratory at the University of Illinois at Chicago for the past 3 years. Well, prior to that, I also did research at UIC in middle school, but I did more serious research throughout high school. I am pursuing a STEM-related career field in college and will hopefully be doing the same kinds of research that I'm doing now. And I can definitely speak to what it's like being a high school student in a major research facility and not really knowing anything, really, and kind of just like starting off with a blank slate.
Yeah, hi. Oh, is my mic working? There we go.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Hope. I'm a recent undergraduate of University of Chicago. I worked in the Pritzker Molecular Engineering School, doing kind of physicsy, engineering, quantum science research. I'll be attending grad school in the fall, and I started dabbling in research in high school, but I think the main kind of span of my experiences were definitely in undergrad.
Hi, my name is Brad. I'm a status professor in the University of Toronto School of the Environment. I've been conducting research since I was an undergrad, which also was at U of T at the University of Toronto in the Department of Geography. Most of my work now is very different from the other panelists. I've made a shift to environmental economics. But I run a student research program, both for high school and undergraduate, and any other student. There's no barrier. You don't have to be at the University of Toronto to participate in the research program. It covers every area you can think of, as long as you know enough about your area so we can start to build some computer models. So there's no wet labs, but you'd say it's one big dry lab. And currently we're running the whole program online, so there are no barriers of distance.
Awesome. So I think Dr. Henry's not here yet. So we will kind of just come back to her when she joins. So, like I said, we're going to go into some of the benefits of research next. So I really like this quote. So basically it's saying research is formalized curiosity, It's poking and prying with a purpose. I think this really encapsulates research very well. So it's kind of basically all research kind of starts with a question, right? So you are curious about something and you choose to explore that in more depth. So it's a really great way to kind of further any sort of questions you have about content in a certain area or subject. And yeah. So there are some skills. Obviously, this is not like any sort of like comprehensive list or anything like that. But these are kind of some of the skills that you could gain from doing research. So for example, you gain critical thinking skills. That comes about because especially like once you're physically doing the research, there are some times where things might not work that you expect to work. And you kind of have to sit there and kind of reevaluate why something isn't working. And then patience, that also relates to that. So sometimes you're going to like hit a rut or something like that, and maybe your experiment like fails a couple of times, and then you realize, oh, this is something that I need to change, and then everything starts going really smoothly. So it's a huge learning process. And then it also requires, and you kind of also foster your initiative. So there's kind of a need for maybe not split second decision making, but definitely decision making. And you don't want to always be like reliant on maybe like your PI or like a lab manager. Obviously, like independent research, that is an automatic way to kind of foster the initiative. But even if you are working under someone in a lab, you can also show initiative. And just to kind of wrap up the skills part, you can also learn about scientific articles. So I know a lot of people have started journal clubs during these COVID times, just as, you know, kind of something to do. I'm in one for neuroscience. There's a couple on LinkedIn if you're really interested. And basically when you do research, you kind of get to know more about the field. Because what you're doing is not just happening in a vacuum, it's happening in relation to everything that's happening that other people are also working on. You also obviously learn more about data analysis. So that kind of varies in field to field. Like for example, some fields you'll be using like R or something like that, or, you know, computer visualization software. Others, this will just be from like running a test, and you just get, you know, your results over a period of time. So this could look different based on what kind of research you do, but basically you learn how to draw conclusions from a large amount of data. And then obviously organization is a huge one as well. So that kind of deals with being really methodical in what you're doing. If you kind of miss a step, sometimes it's okay, but most of the times it'll affect something else. So you need to learn how to be methodical. Okay. So types of research. So kind of when we were all introducing ourselves, we spoke about the different kinds of research that we're doing. This is kind of just to reiterate that a little bit. There's not like one type of research. I think a lot of people, when they think of research, they think of, I'm in a lab, I've got a pipette in my hand, I've got gloves on, and like that's what research is. But research isn't always that way. Research can happen in a lot of different ways. So for example, it can happen independently. You could do that in high school, college, really at any point. It could be guided. It could be, you know, supervised by a PI. So PI would be, you know, the primary investigator. So basically the person in charge of the project. It could be structured. It could be a dry lab, which means like you're not handling like the chemicals. Could be a wet lab, like the conventional, I guess, sort of image of it. It could also be clinical. So I do clinical research, for example. That's really interacting with people one-on-one. And yeah, so I don't know if any of the panelists kind of want to elaborate on the kind of like research they do and how it relates to this, but.
Definitely, I think going a little bit on the different categories of structured, guided, independent, I think often people have this, at least I did when I came into undergrad, with this presumption that I had to do independent research immediately. I don't think that's the case, and a lot of people are there to kind of give you that structure, that guidance, to kind of ease you into the process because it is a learning process. So I think sometimes that seems a little bit intimidating, but there's a lot of resources out there.
Yeah, my research program is all on the computer. So I guess it's a dry lab in some ways, but you do conduct experiments. The difference is you build your own virtual laboratory to conduct the experiments. So if you want an experimental research experience, you can still get that outside of a wet lab. And in the social sciences, of course, there are no wet labs. You would be working directly with people, or you would be working with computer models.
Right. So for me, just to add on, I kind of had a good mix of these things. I actually started research in high school through a little program. And so I got the experience of exactly as Magda said, which was pipetting. And they described it to me as kind of just being a little monkey and doing this and doing that. And it was a good experience because that's kind of where you have to start learning before you can ask and think to ask a few bigger questions. But that was an amazing experience. I didn't go on to do more wet labs in undergrad. And as I'm doing right now, we did a lot of that data analysis. So we do work with people and patients, but it's a lot of collection of did they go through this heart procedure well? What kind of things could we draw from that and their backgrounds? And another set of put them through an MRI and just analyze their brain scan. So maybe not as experimental in let's give them this medication and see what happens kind of deal, but a lot of data analysis, which, as Hope said, someone will help you. It's not, you don't always have to just start on your own. So it was really nice to have grad students in my PI help me out.
All right, so now we're just going to move into a couple of like ways to find research. So obviously, like the first one is emailing professors. So what you want to do when you email professors is you want to indicate an interest in what they're researching. So if you just, look them up, usually you can find their lab's like website, and it'll give you like the recent publications, what they're kind of focused on, stuff like that. It's kind of difficult to feign interest in something that you don't actually have interest in. So there's so much like different fields of research that there's something for everybody. So there's really not a need to feel like you need to force yourself to do something that you're not really that interested in. So keep an open mind, but just realize that there's a lot of different, ways that research can happen, like we were talking about. Then emailing lab managers is another one. I feel like a lot of people don't do this as much. Lab managers, especially for like larger labs, they're in charge of the hiring process in a lot of instances. And they also manage the lab members because oftentimes the PI, so the primary investigator, oftentimes they're really busy or they might be also, professors or something like that. Some PIs are more hands-on with their labs, some of them are a little less, it kind of depends. So lab managers in those instances are really important to reach out to. And then you can also reach out to any sort of undergrad or high school program. So I actually started doing research through an undergrad program at my school. They have a lot of them offered at different schools depending on where you go. They have obviously a ton for high school students, really a lot. I would just advise you to, keep an eye out for those, whether it's on like social media posting or, looking for them. And then there are also REUs. So if you do end up going to a school that's not as like research focused, you could apply for these. They're considered to be highly competitive in terms of how many people they kind of accept for each spot in their programs. But if you apply to a lot of them and you speak to people that have already done them, you can really maximize your chances of kind of getting a position. So I'm just gonna run through this really quickly so that we can actually get into the questions because we're going a little bit slower than I thought. So basically, to reiterate, when you reach out to someone, you want to indicate that you're interested in what they're actually working on right now. maybe also indicate like any sort of like past interest that you have or like where that interest started. But if you don't obviously have like any sort of experience or something like that, that's okay too. You'll want to attach your resume. Not everyone will have relevant experiences in like past research, especially for when you're applying for your first research position. So don't worry about that. It's not by any means like a prerequisite to getting into a lab. In some cases, you can go in person, but you don't want to just do that without checking first, because that's obviously very frowned upon. And some labs have, you know, different safety protocols and stuff like that. And especially right now with, you know, coronavirus and stuff, do not just walk into like a lab. Just, yeah, don't do that. And then, yeah, so like we basically just said, you're going to want to research and then prepare for the kind of position that you want at that lab. Then you can apply. That's either through a program or a person or something like that. And then you can interview. So preparing for an interview for a research position, very similar to preparing for an interview for a job or for, you know, work or anything like that. They ask very similar questions. They will probably also ask you about if you have any background, but again, you don't have to have background to get started on research. So now we get into the Q&A. So Nora or Anna, could you guys start with asking the questions of the panelists?
Yeah, of course. So why don't we start? I guess I can start with you for the questions that I've prepared for you. So let me just pull them up really quickly. Okay, perfect. So, okay, I would say that my first question is, apart from like the obvious change in subject, because you have been studying like neuroscience plus biochemistry, what would you say are the main differences in participating in the clinical research versus the biochemistry research?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. In terms of the biochemistry research, it's more of the kind of conventional like wet lab research. So what I do when I go in there is I just run some experiments. The first year it was more guided, so I worked under the lab manager, which was a really great experience for me. I worked with the lab manager and the PI directly, which I consider to be like, I was really fortunate because sometimes you'll end up just with like a graduate student or stuff like that. And because of that, I got really invested in it. And so I returned for, you know, several more years to do research there. In terms of the clinical research, what I do is we do different clinical studies. So the place that I work at specifically, it's an outpatient clinic, like I said before, focused on chronic pain patients. So a lot of chronic pain patients are older in age. Some of them are not older in age. Some of them have had, you know, very unfortunate like accidents or something like that. But I go and ask them if they want to be, you know, a part of research studies on kind of different solutions to chronic pain. So a lot of people go through different kinds of, you know, therapy, but we also think that there's, you know, obviously other aspects to pain besides just the actual treatment. It's also very holistic. So if I had to say the main difference between the two, I would say probably the interaction with people is kind of different, because for clinical, you're interacting with the people that you're kind of impacting directly. Whereas for my biochemistry research, yes, like I'm interacting with the people in my lab, but I'm not interacting with the people that I'm going to potentially be helping in the future, because I work on like cancer research. So it's kind of like that's the main difference for me.
That's really interesting. I guess this is in a sense a follow-up question. So, what has like been the benefits of studying the combination of all of these different topics, so both the clinical research and the biochemistry, as well as like neuroscience? Like, how does that fit in kind of to your overall like goals of like just future career in STEM, as well as just like your interests?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of, obviously that's a very interesting combination. A lot of people always ask me why I do something that's different from my actual major. In terms of why I did that, I actually applied to a bunch of labs freshman year when I first started. I applied through an undergrad program actually initially at my school. So definitely look at those. Those are very helpful in guiding you through the process. Um, and I just ended up really liking the topic that I was going to be working on for the biochem research. And then the clinical research actually happened a little bit later on. So I actually took a class with a professor my first semester, freshman year. And I really loved that class. And she was doing clinical research in addition to being a professor. So I reached out to her and I was really very interested in clinical research kind of from the beginning. So that was kind of my thought process with both of those.
Okay, great. So that kind of answers my third question. Like I was asking, like how does neuroscience fit into your research decision? So I guess we can move on to the fourth one, which is how you participate your research through the Health System and the Medical School. So what was the process to get into those programs, and what are the benefits under studying? Like, what have you found that has been really useful or that you really liked about those programs?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say I feel like I'm always really fortunate to be in those programs just because we do get a lot of research funding at my school. I know that there's a lot of, research focused schools, but some schools don't have that kind of emphasis, especially like a lot of, liberal arts schools don't have that kind of emphasis. So I consider myself to be, really lucky to have the opportunity. In terms of the process, yeah, so for the clinical research, I just, reached out to the professor that I had taken a class with. And then she recommended me for the position since they had an open position. And I interviewed and it went well. And then I got a very nice swanky ID badge that swipes me into like the medical campus and stuff like that. Um, and yeah, so that's pretty much like what the protocol was. Gotta get like flu shots and stuff every year.
Yeah.
Yes.
Um, and I guess the last question is, so now you are running this organization, General Intelligences. And I guess my question just serves like a lot of different topics. First, like how does that affect your research in terms of you've probably reached out to a lot of people for events and things like that? Has there anything that you have like learned through working through this organization? Maybe time commitment has changed or anything relating to how your research has been affected by running this organization?
Yeah, so I would say I could probably get you a better answer to that in the fall, mostly because I do my research primarily during the school year, just because I don't live on campus besides during the school year. Um, some of my work is able to be done remotely. A lot of it is not. So I will say because of, COVID, it's probably very likely that my research is going to get put on hold for a bit. They're not letting, undergrads do research at my school right now. They've just actually opened the labs back up again for essential research. So we're kind of just waiting to hear about how everything's going to work out for that. But in the meantime, I've just kind of been reading up on the literature, and that's as much as I could do right now, basically.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No problem.
So should we move on to the next ones? Okay, perfect. So for me, the next person would be Dr. Brad Bass.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So for me, the first question would be, what would you say are the main differences in application for theoretical research versus academic research?
If you are in applied research, you may find yourself in a more standard research model where you're formulating a hypothesis, you're collecting or generating the data and testing it statistically. In the theoretical realm, you're not really testing ideas, you're developing ideas, and you're not necessarily in the standard hypothesis testing, can you disprove the hypothesis model of research. In previous years, probably 20 years ago, theoreticians were also very mathematical if you were in STEM or even the social sciences. That doesn't have to be the case anymore. Most of my students, if they want to look at theoretical issues, they can do it with computer programs, the specific types of software that I give them in order to answer theoretical questions. Ultimately, though, if you pursue a career in research as a theoretician, you still need to apply for grants. You still need to support your own research, your own graduate students. So in many ways, there are similarities, but as I said, they are different. A lot of people choose a theoretical bent because they love the discipline they're in, but they really hate getting their hands wet. And they find that the theoretical questions really fascinate them.
Great, thank you. So I guess you kind of touched in on this already, but my second question was, what type of person do you think is better suited for theoretical research compared to academic?
That's a very hard one to answer because I've gone into many different fields. In my career, I've had an opportunity to explore many different fields, some theoretical, some very applied. And the theoretician generally is a very good conceptual thinker. They see things. They can think abstractly, or they can see things in the abstract. They're probably a big picture person as opposed to a detailed person. And I said, and they're probably a little bit more adept at the tools that a theoretician would use in their discipline, whether it's computer modeling, mathematics, or in some cases, philosophical speculation.
Great, thank you. So like you mentioned, you have gone through many different paths, I guess, in research. And a question is, like, in the early stages of your career, what kind of pushed you to make those decisions to kind of follow both theoretical research as well as probably some academic research and just all the different subjects and topics that you have explored and studied over the years?
Okay. In the very earliest years, I was guided to my research. I didn't really have that much choice. And starting about 1994, 95, I joined a new research group where basically I was put in charge of a program called Complexities and Nonlinearities. And I pretty much had free reign of what I could do. So I basically, scoped out a field. I then looked at the best way or the most interesting way that spoke to me to get into it. And you talk to people, and sometimes you'll talk to a person and you'll find they have a very interesting idea that you want to explore. So I spent many years doing research in green infrastructure. I did that. It came out of a simple conversation with a new colleague. And he made a suggestion to me, and I thought, wow, that would be great if we could do that. Or he showed me a picture. I can't remember what it was, of something he had done. And that defined my career for 20 or 25 years, just responding to that picture and suggestion or question that he asked me. Once you start down one field, so green infrastructure led me to research on energy conservation, which eventually tied in with my research on complexity and thermodynamics and led to research on biodiversity. So often one thing will then become a stepping stone to another.
Great, thank you so much. I would say the next question is, what opportunities do you think are available when you're studying under theoretical research, or like what lessons you take away from that experience that maybe you wouldn't get anywhere else?
So this is very interesting. I don't even know how many years ago this was, but a student came to me. She had a degree in mathematics. She wanted to go into an applied field, but on the theoretical side. She didn't want to collect data. She wanted to do mathematical modeling. And because of her mathematical bent, when she applied to a graduate school, if there were people in that school who shared that bent, they immediately grabbed her. So you're already attractive to a group of faculty that, for the most part, wouldn't consider the other students. I found with some theoretical areas, such as engineering science. So engineering, as applied as it is, has a theoretical side as well. The engineering science students, when I hired them, they could do anything. Even though they were highly theoretical, most of my work was computer modeling at the time, they were the ones who could put the models together for me. They're the ones who put the first green roof energy model together for me, but actually the first green roof energy model ever. So I really, so I think there are some unique opportunities open to people who pursue a theoretical bent, but again, some of the opportunities available to people like Magda wouldn't be open to you because you wouldn't have the lab experience.
Of course, thank you. And I guess my last question is, you are very successful in your career and you have had a lot of experience. So what would be like a takeaway that you have for people that are just starting research, maybe something that you think was very valuable from your time researching, or just something that you've learned in general that you'd want to pass on?
Two things. Let me tell you how I got my first research job. When I got to third year of university, I avoided any course that really had more than 6 people in it. When you're in a course, and I had some courses where there were only 2 students. I had one course that was 2 students and 2 professors in my 4th year. When you're in a course like that, you really get to know faculty. I got my first research job because I just asked a question to the professor after the class that no one else had asked. And he looked at me, he didn't answer the question, he just looked at me and said, "What are you doing this summer? Would you like a job?" I was like, well, of course, I'd like a job. And that was my first research experience. And again, it was very much like the experience Patricia talked about. They were telling you what to do and you did it. But it was fairly enjoyable, except for the one environment I had to go to, which gave me headaches every day. But the other takeaway is, if you're not sure what you want to do, or if you want to do a lot of things, just pick one. And if you really have trouble, pick the most distasteful one to you. Start with the one that normally you would stay 50 feet away from. You'll learn more from that than jumping into an area that really excites you.
Thank you. That was really interesting. Thank you so much. So I guess now we can go to Hope. Hopefully would be the next person. Okay, great. So if you're ready, my first question is, why did you decide to conduct research at Uchicago, and what was the application process like?
Yeah, so I applied as a general undergrad to the college program. So I didn't go in with like a research position or anything, but I did say on my application I was interested in doing more research after some dabblings in high school science fair and summer programs. But definitely my first year, I was kind of trying to figure out my interests, trying to figure out what at the University of Chicago I'm interested in, kind of what programs they have. And definitely during the summer, I also did a little bit of research into kind of what offerings they had. I looked into the programs, I looked into physics, I looked into PME, I learned a little bit about the professors. So I think definitely all those processes were guided also by my college choice. So they weren't very separate. As for the application process, just a little bit more generally, it was the Uchicago Uncommon app. We had a few really quirky essays because the admissions really like that. But more specifically for the research position I later got, what was interesting was the PI definitely asked for a formal resume, and he wanted to sit down with me and talk a little bit. I think my experience was a little different in that it was pretty different than a job interview, in which that he just wanted to make sure that I was truly interested in doing sustained work with the group. He was very afraid of students coming in, dabbling for like half an hour and then like going out again. He just wanted to make sure the student would be willing to kind of stay for a certain length of time. But all of it felt rather informal, very casual. But at the same time, there was this kind of formalistic process.
Thank you. So my next question would be, why did you pick molecular engineering, and what do you think are the most interesting things about studying in that field?
Yeah, definitely. So I graduated as a physics molecular engineering double major. And the interesting thing about molecular engineering is I think it's a very unique program to Uchicago. I'm not sure if any other university has a program quite like it. It actually is almost like 3 departments in one. You have the biology kind of component, you have the chemical component, and then you have the physical component. So they were doing immunology for biology, they're doing polymers and soft matter for chemistry, and for physics, they're doing quantum research. So quantum computing, quantum information theory, quantum information experiment, which is what I was doing. So definitely, this was also again influenced by my college choice, in which I applied as a chemical engineering major to a lot of schools. And also, so I was looking more into chemistry things, but then I looked into the PME, and it seemed very interesting that they had this much broader approach to the concept of engineering. And they were really trying to push the boundary of how you define engineering as a field. So I kind of wanted to be part of that. And they had an entirely new undergraduate program that was very flexible. You could really pinpoint what you wanted to do. And through that, I kind of deviated from chemical things into physics. And now I'm doing like physical research, applied physics stuff. Hopefully that addressed the question.
Yes, it definitely did. Thank you. My third question is, what are some challenges that you face maybe in your early stages of research or recently in the application process, or just any issues that you have encountered with conducting your research?
Yeah, so I think at the beginning as a freshman, definitely took a little bit to pinpoint what topics I was interested in. I went in, and my first summer after undergrad actually did more of the material stuff, more of the chemical stuff with polymers and soft matter. But through there, I was looking into other professors at school. I found the current PI that I had worked with throughout my undergrad afterwards, Professor Ashram, who was doing a lot more of the quantum stuff. So I came in with like a little bit less background than I thought I was going to have. I just lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question again? And I'll gather my thoughts together.
Yeah, of course. Just like any challenges, either in the early stages of picking your research, like you have addressed, or application process.
Right. So I think one of the biggest challenges was actually getting a hold of my PI. He was a very busy man, and trying to get an email through to him took quite a bit of time. And at first I was really discouraged because I thought maybe it was because he thought my background wasn't fitting, I was too young, he didn't have spots, because he seemed to be a very popular guy in the department. But then I realized it was just simply, he didn't get my email. It kind of fell through the cracks out of the thousands of emails he was getting every day. So follow-up kind of pushed that through after also speaking to a few of his grad students, being like, hey, is he taking anyone right now? So I think definitely trying to pick up that initiative and trying to pass through that initial discouragement was one of the initial challenges that I had. More on the research side, I think it was just after being in the lab for a little bit, realizing that research isn't as glamorous as a lot of people might initially think, in which, oh, I'm going to have these results after a few weeks. Sometimes it takes longer. You're going to meet obstacles. You're going to have to work through them. And a lot of it is having that perseverance to pass through those small daily obstacles. But when you look back a year later, you're like, oh, I did something. I created something. I achieved something. And then I feel like that payoff at the end makes it all worth it.
Great, thank you so much. My fourth question is, so you work under the Shalom group. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. But what is something that you think you've really liked about your experience working under that group, or something that you just think has really helped make your experience just better, more enjoyable?
Yeah, so the Ashram group, I think what's interesting about the group, it's slightly on the larger side. It has about 25 people or so in the group, so larger for the University of Chicago. So definitely I got a little bit less one-to-one time with the PI per se, but I definitely got a lot more time kind of mingling with the grad students and with the group in general, and kind of understanding kind of what the group culture is and kind of all the different strands of research and projects and thinking that's going on in the group at that time. But definitely it was also a group that offered me a lot of resources, because almost everyone who I talked to could be a mentor for me. And definitely they're all open to being a mentor for me. So even if you're lacking that PI's direct mentorship, almost everyone else served as a resource. And I think that was very valuable. I think also one more thing that was interesting was Professor Ashram had a very good skill set of being very articulate in when he spoke about his research. And that was definitely something that the entire group picked up on. So being able to communicate kind of the ideas that we had was something that also I think proved to be very valuable later on.
Great, thank you. And the last question is that you have also studied physics apart from molecular engineering. So I guess my question is, how has the decision to pick molecular engineering as a focus instead of just apart from the physics that you already studied, how has that worked into kind of your research position, your career?
Yeah, so for graduate school, I'll be applying researching in the field of applied physics. So definitely more on the physicsy side than maybe the broader kind of chemical biology, physical kind of broad engineering ideas that was in the molecular engineering department. But I did definitely enjoy how the department did have those three subsections. And each of the three subsections related very closely to the initial kind of scientific departments. So chemical kind of subsection related to the chemistry department, the quantum kind of subsection related to the physics department. So you had this very broad base of interdisciplinary work that could go on, because you had those resources to all the other departments, as well as kind of your home department in the college as well. So I think definitely kind of being on that intersection was something that appealed to me, and I really enjoyed it, especially coming in with a little bit more of a chemical background in high school. So that allowed me kind of the softer transition from one subsection to the other, and kind of to transport my skills from one field to the other as well.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was really useful. I would say the next person for me is Prathusha. I also don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm so sorry if I'm not.
You're good, Pratusha. It took me a long time to learn it, so you're here to.
Okay, perfect. So, I guess my first question is, why did you decide to pursue an MS or specialized master's program, and what have been the benefits or challenges of making that decision?
Absolutely. So, the United States is really lucky in that there are a lot of master's programs. Personally, I am pre-med. I want to go to med school. I knew I would have this gap year. And specialized master's programs have a lot of benefits, but a lot of people say they are high risk, high reward. So you can go into them for a lot of reasons. A lot of people, if they had a low undergrad GPA or not a hugely competitive MCAT, there are specific programs that will allow you resources. They'll teach you how to take the MCAT. They'll offer a bunch of different classes to get your science GPA up, things like that. I have this gap year. Luckily, I did pretty well in undergrad, but I'm a neuroscience major. So my first semester in college did not go as well as my later semesters in college. Didn't have a great intro to OChem and Gen Chem, things like this. And so I really wanted to show that I can compete well in these specific kind of chemistry, biochem, those courses, stuff that I didn't really focus on as a neuro major. So my program is through the University of North Texas Health Science Center. They have a great medical sciences program. A lot of these programs are well known. And so these programs could be connected to medical schools themselves. They could be connected to research programs. So part of the one that I'm in, if you wanted to, the second year is a full research track. So if you wanted to, I've been reading a few of your questions in the chat. A couple of you asked about MD, PhD, stuff like this. If you have time and you're not ready to go straight into a PhD or straight into medical school, things like this can get you research experience. It's just another thing to look into. And the benefits that got me is they're wonderful. They have wonderful advisors. They're helping me kind of gear my medical school application. They'll write you letters of recommendation based on what you do. They'll help you with interview skills, a lot of things. There's a lot of benefits if you want to look into these programs.
That's great. Thank you so much. My next question is, so you decided to follow a BS in neuroscience. So how does that fit into like what we previously discussed about kind of the research and all the programs that you were previously part of and just kind of your master's?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually started as a biology major in college, and I switched, I think, a year or a year and a half in my sophomore year to neuroscience. And this was basically, this was mainly on personal interest. I just liked learning through a neuroscience perspective. It's not that I don't have an interest in biochem and biology, but I just loved learning about action potentials and basically going right from the neurons and expanding upwards to the body systems. And that's just what I did as a pre-med. How does neuroscience fit into what I did for research? We had a good neuroscience school. I went to the University of Texas, Dallas. We have a brain and behavioral science school. So there's a lot of research opportunities there. But I didn't limit what I wanted to do to neuroscience. You do not have to do research within your major. Sometimes schools may say that they're recruiting only through your major, like labs will say, we only accept biochem, bio, and other natural science majors, and that's okay. But a lot of labs don't. So if I wanted to, and I did, I applied to a lot of biochem and bio labs. I ended up doing a brain imaging lab just because I found the right fit. I liked what they were doing and they were very friendly and we just had that good connection. So that's what I ended up doing. But neuroscience itself didn't exactly, it's not what I was aiming to do.
Great, thank you. I guess this is kind of like a long question. It has a lot of parts, but since you have been more focused on medicine, how do you think that that choice of kind of topic and a focus has affected your research in terms of maybe some advantages that has given you, challenges, or just anything in general that you think is specific to your topic and your choice of career?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when I was an undergrad and I was a freshman, research definitely was one of those check boxes that you wanted to check off your list for applying to medical school. I'm hoping there are a lot of pre-meds in our audience right now so that I'm not speaking to just PhD students. But it is considered, I'm not going to say the medical schools want you to do research or anything like that. It's not something you have to do. But I do think it's something nice to explore. You don't have to do research to get into medical school, and you don't have to try to mold yourself into fitting whatever lab position is there. I feel like a lot of students were, they got into lab and they were just doing it. They were just going through the motions. They weren't really enjoying it. They weren't really having fun. It was just something to check off. And I wouldn't encourage that, because when you do find a lab with very helpful mentors and you do actually engage with the students in your lab and participate and try to develop interest in what you're doing, it can be really helpful. It can be helpful in that you get opportunities once you kind of invest some time and effort. I presented at a conference eventually. Other students who kind of were just going through the motions maybe didn't have the connections to their PI, maybe didn't have or ask for help from grad students to kind of look for opportunities like that. I think it's important as a pre-med that you don't want to present yourself as, look, I did it, I did the research kind of deal. It's something where if you like research and you want to do it, show that you're interested, show that the experience was worthwhile, that you learned something from it.
Thank you. I guess the last question is, so like, how has like the application process, like starting off in research, you already kind of talked about the
Mhm.
early stages in your college career, but if there's maybe anything else that you want to add that maybe was unique to your experience, or you think that it's important for someone to know if they're trying to go into the same path, like more towards medicine.
Okay, so what I suggest to the freshmen that I mentor at my college and university is to first take some time, and this kind of addresses a few of the questions in the chat box. Take some time to adjust to college and figure out how to reorganize yourself. I wouldn't jump into anything, and it's never really too late to start either. So I guess what I'm trying to say is you don't have to jump into research your first freshman year, first semester, to try to like hit your goals. Take some time to really organize yourself because college does have a transition. You do need to find some balance in balancing your courses and meeting your professors and things like that. But then also consider that if you do want to do research and you want to get a meaningful experience out of it, and you're trying to go into medical school right after college, that you really have 3 years to put all this stuff on your application. That fourth year on your medical school application will be planned activities. And that's great. And you do list that as planned activities on the application itself. But it doesn't speak to what you've already done. So if you do plan to do research, that's something to consider within the timeline. If you guys have more questions about that, please feel free to contact me. And I've answered a few questions in the panel as well. And so if you do have more questions on that, we'll give you content information later. If I didn't answer it fully, just go ahead and resend that question in.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I guess for me, the next person would be Annika.
Yeah, hi.
Hi. So thank you so much for being here. So the first question is, so you participated in ISEF, which is a competition, if I'm not mistaken. So, like, why did you decide to go into that competition? How's that affected like the process into entering college for you? Is there anything you learned?
Yeah, so a little background for people who don't know. ISEF is the International Science and Engineering Fair. It's, as the name states, an international science fair competition. Literally international. There are people from like pretty much every country, not even major country, but like every country. And originally when I started doing research, I didn't even know that my city fair was a qualifier for ISEF. So that wasn't really a goal of mine when I started doing research. I was just really interested in the research that I was doing. And then I wanted to find a space where I could share my research with other people and then get feedback from other professors or experts in the field who were outside of the lab that I was working with. And as a high school student, I think it's really hard to find like you're not going to be finding opportunities to present at conferences or get papers published the first like year that you're doing research. And I think that science fair is a really good space for high school and like even younger students to explore like academic research. So I participated in my city. I'm from Chicago, so my city's fair, and I qualified for ISEF, which was really exciting. And then when I went to ISEF, there was definitely a lot that I learned. It is probably the best experience that I had in high school. I was able to speak with over 15 PhDs from around the country that specialize in the same field of research that I did research in. And I got so many ideas, and I came home and there were like so many things that I wanted to do, and that kind of motivated me to keep doing research. So I think that, yeah, that's pretty much why I participated in ISEF.
Great, thank you. So my second question is, so you started like doing research very early on in high school, and you decided to do biomedical engineering, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken. So what were some kind of like the decisions to start into that field? Did you find that it was challenging to go into that field such an early on in your research, or did you find that it was a great place to start? So just kind of expand more on that.
So I actually started doing research in 7th and 8th grade in a wet lab experience research. I worked in a oncology lab, so very unrelated to biomedical engineering. Kind of like what Prathusha was saying, that was very just like, here's this 96 well plate, pipette a bunch of stuff. Like it wasn't very, I had some ideas, but then towards the end of 8th grade, I started coming up with my own ideas and said, okay, here's this thing I want to do. Can we do this? And that's when I started transitioning more into actively doing research. Then in high school, there's the state that I live in, the major universities have like a policy that you have to be a certain age in order to actually do research that can be like presented or like taken out of the university. So I needed to be 16, I think, in order to do that. So the first 2 years of high school, I was mostly just reading and keeping in contact with professors that I knew were doing research that I was interested in. And that's when I kind of found the area. Specifically, I do research in regenerative medicine related field. So I found a professor that did that research that I had been reading about, and I emailed them about, is there any like chance that I could do anything? Or I wasn't really expecting to have a spot in the lab. And all the research that I did was on a volunteer basis, so I wasn't getting paid or anything like that, and I wasn't expecting to get paid. But yeah, that's kind of how I started doing research. And I don't think that I really needed a background in the stuff that we were doing there, because there's a lot of things in biomedical engineering that you don't learn in high school that I definitely will only learn in college. So like organic chemistry and more advanced general chemistry and things like that. I had taken a chemistry class prior to joining the lab, but there were definitely a lot of gaps in my knowledge. But I think that once you start reading more and kind of like self-educating, you can catch on pretty quickly, and you don't need to like know 100% of every single theory in order to do research and have a good understanding of the area that you're in.
Thank you so much. So you kind of already answered my fourth question, so I guess I'll just skip to the last one, which is how do you see yourself like continuing research later on in your college career, maybe if you're going to continue as an undergrad or graduate student? So yeah, so just kind of how you see your career developing in the future in terms of your research.
Yeah, so like I said earlier, I'm going to be attending Haverford College, which is a really small liberal arts college in Pennsylvania. By really small, I mean there's like less than 300 people in my class. So there's no graduate school associated with it. And unlike a school like UMich, research is not conventionally a large priority in the sense that there's not like huge amounts of funding or whatever it may be in a large research university, but I still do really want to do research. So I intentionally am like chose to go to this college over my state school, which has all of those opportunities, mostly because the research that they do there is very specific and basic. It's a lot more, I'm interested in biology, so it's a lot more molecular biology focused and less of a translational kind of research and more of like very basic academic research, which is something I really want to have exposure and experience to before going on to do other things in the future. So I think that regardless of which college you go to, you don't need to go to like a big state school with large research facilities in order to have exposure to research, regardless of what kind of research it might be. Yeah, in terms of for the future, I don't really know exactly what I want to do, but I am a biology major.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So I'm pretty sure that I got to everyone. Miss Henry is unfortunately not here. I'm not sure if maybe she got mixed up with the time zone, but she's the one that's in linguistics. She's also specializes in the intersection between computer science and medicine. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to drop her email on the chat. So if anyone has any questions that are specific to linguistics, which I hear that we do have, I'm sure that she'd be happy to answer to any of those emails. But yeah, so that's all I have for now. So if Magda, maybe we want to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been answering most of the questions in the Q&A. Thank you for all of the questions. That's a lot of questions, more than 100 questions. So very good job, guys. If you do have any follow-up questions, I will send a follow-up email to the people that attended afterwards with contact information if you wanted to ask us more questions specific to us, if everyone on the panel is okay with that. Yeah, so in terms of this, I guess we'll just be wrapping up. Thank you everyone for coming. Hopefully the recording works. Not sure. Sometimes Zoom is a little quirky, so we will find out, but I really appreciate everyone coming. All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone. Bye.
And again, reach out if you guys do have further questions. We'd be happy to answer. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for attending.